Statin drugs are among the most prescribed drugs in the world. Just about anyone who shows up in a doctor's office and takes a lab test and shows a high total cholesterol level or an elevation in a type of cholesterol carrier called low density lipoprotein, which is the main carrier of cholesterol in the blood. If you show up with lab values indicating that you're high in both of those values, the average physician is going to take out his prescription pad and write you a prescription for drugs called statin drugs. Statin drugs are among the most prescribed drugs in the world to treat elevated blood lipids, which is mainly referring to total cholesterol and LDL. Statin drugs do not have any effect on triglycerides, which is basically fat that circulates in the blood. However, there's a natural remedy for that, which is fish oil. If you consume fish oil or eat fatty fish about 3 times a week, fatty fish being like mackerel, sardines, salmon, halibut, that type of fish. If you eat that about 3 times a week, or you take fish oil about at least 2 grams a day, you lower your blood triglycerides 60%. And what raises blood triglycerides? Increased alcohol intake and increased sugar intake. But that's off topic. Today I want to talk about a natural alternative to statin drugs. This is called red yeast rice. Red yeast rice is made by culturing rice with various strains of the yeast. I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly. Monaskis purpuris. It's not something you have to remember. It's just that's how they make red yeast rice. It's been used for thousands of years in Chinese medicine to treat, among other things, heart disease. The Chinese, thousands of years ago, really didn't have any knowledge of cholesterol and blood lipids, but they knew if they gave this red yeast product to patients who seemed to have heart problems, it seemed to solve the heart problem. So it's been used for thousands of years. In other words, it's a traditional medicine. Red yeast rice can lower elevated cholesterol and low-density lipoprotein because it contains a substance called monocolin K. This is the same ingredient that's found in prescription cholesterol-lowering medications such as lovastatin. Lovastatin is one of the first statin drugs, and monocolin K is identical to lovastatin. So you could say that red yeast rice is a natural statin without being a drug. It actually contains the exact same ingredient, although it's in a little bit lower amounts compared to the actual statin drugs. One frequent criticism of red yeast rice product, which I'll get to later in more detail, is that they're not standardized, meaning that some red yeast rice products contain more monocolin K than others, and if it doesn't contain enough monocolin K, it's not going to do a damn thing to lower cholesterol or blood lipids, and that's a problem. There's one of the reasons why a lot of red yeast rice products are very low in this monocolin K is because the FDA got on them a couple of years ago, the Food and Drug Administration. Now, you have to know that the Food and Drug Administration, one of the main purposes of being is to protect the pharmaceutical industry. And at that time, this is in the late 90s, it appeared that people were turning to red yeast rice instead of spending money on expensive statin drugs. So the FDA went after red yeast rice and tried to get it classified as a prescription drug. Although they never succeeded, what they did do is scare a lot of supplement companies into producing supplements that had much lower levels of monocolin K, which made them virtually useless, basically ineffective. Red yeast rice has shown other beneficial effects as well besides lowering cholesterol and lipids. This ranges from reduced cancer cell growth to improve blood sugar and insulin levels. While statin drugs are well known to produce side effects in muscle, such as rapid muscle breakdown and fatigue. In a worst case scenario, both statin drugs and red yeast rice, if used excessively, can produce a condition called rhabdomyolysis, which is a extreme rapid breakdown of muscle. It can cause kidney failure because when your muscles break down, there's a pigment in muscle called myoglobin. It's released when the muscles break down. It travels in the blood to the kidney, and it can literally jam the filtering units of the kidney. And if it's not treated properly, this could result in kidney failure. So it's nothing to play with. A 2017 study that compared red yeast rice to the statin drug simvastatin showed far less muscle fatigue produced when red yeast rice was ingested instead of the statin drug. It also worked just as well as the drug in lowering elevated blood lipids. And I recently saw a study about red yeast rice, which also compared it to standard statin drugs prescribed by doctors. This study showed that the red yeast rice supplement produced far more less muscle problems compared to the statin drugs. By the way, you can avoid a lot of the muscle problems associated with both statin drugs and red yeast rice by simply supplementing your diet with a nutrient called coenzyme Q10. The recommended amount for this purpose is about 50 milligrams, but I would suggest at least taking 100 milligrams of the ubiquinone form of coenzyme Q10, which was 7 times more absorbed than the ubiquinone form. So ubiquinone is the best form of Q10. Again, the dose to protect muscle problems is 50 to 100 milligrams a day. If you take that and you're taking red yeast rice or statin drugs, you won't have any muscle problems. Although taking statin drugs, people who take statin drugs and work out intensely with weights do show excessive amounts of muscle protein breakdown. And some studies show that statin drugs can interfere with testosterone synthesis. This has not been tested with red yeast rice. It's doubtful that it occurs with red yeast rice for the simple reason that red yeast rice doesn't contain as much of the monocolin K or active statin as do the statin drugs. Statin drugs usually are a lot more powerful, but also means a lot more side effects. A 2010 study published in the American Journal of Cardiology showed in 25 people that red yeast rice lowered total cholesterol by an average of 15% and LDL cholesterol by 21% after about 2 months of treatment. LDL cholesterol, again, stands for low-density lipoprotein. This is the type of protein most associated with cardiovascular disease and heart disease and strokes, because when LDL gets oxidized, it initiates a cascade of changes in arteries that lead to atherosclerosis and eventual, again, heart disease, and strokes, increased risk of strokes. When LDL is not oxidized, however, it's not only not dangerous, it's also useful, because among the other functions, as I said, LDL cholesterol is the main carrier of cholesterol in the blood, and it carries, among its other functions, it carries cholesterol in the blood to the testes, where the cholesterol is picked up by a substance called STAR. The cholesterol is transported into the testes by STAR, and through, again, a cascade of enzymatic reactions, the cholesterol is turned into testosterone through a number of enzymatic steps. So cholesterol is the raw product for testosterone, and LDL carries it to the intestine. So you don't want to completely eliminate LDL cholesterol. A 2007 study looked at 79 people, age range 23 to 65, who received either a placebo or 600 milligrams of red yeast rice twice a day for 8 weeks. The study showed a significant drop in LDL compared to those in the placebo group. A 2012 study found that red yeast rice was able to reduce blood sugar, insulin levels, and systolic blood pressure. That's the top number of a blood pressure, like 140 over 80. 140 is systolic in people with metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is a constellation of syndromes associated with the onset of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. It includes features such as elevated blood glucose, a wider waist or more fat in the gut, high blood pressure, and what's the other one? Oh, I can't remember the other one. But that's together they're called the metabolic syndrome, and red yeast rice seems to help that also. I'm going to have an article in my Applied Metabolics newsletter, in-depth article on how to treat and cure the metabolic syndrome using strictly natural means. No drugs at all, no statins, nothing. That's going to be in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. Metabolic syndrome, by the way, millions of people have it. And like I say, it's a huge risk factor for cardiovascular disease and diabetes and death. One study found that giving red yeast rice extract to rats with kidney damage reduced levels of specific proteins involved in inflammation in the body. That was published in Experimental and Therapeutic Medicine in 2014. Reducing inflammation is very important because systemic inflammation or inflammation throughout the body is a risk factor and thought to be cornerstone of just about every degenerative disease, from heart disease to cancer to brain degeneration. Speaking of cancer, one study found that giving mice with prostate cancer red yeast rice significantly decreased tumor volume compared to a control group. Another study involved exposing prostate cancer cells in a test tube. They added red yeast rice, and the red yeast rice completely destroyed the prostate cancer cells. That was a test tube study, though. There's no proof that it can do that in the human body. Monocolin K is the active compound found in red yeast that is commonly extracted and used in cholesterol-lowering statins. In other words, monocolin K was actually used to make the original statin drugs like lovastatin. According to the FDA, red yeast rice products that contain monocolin K should be considered a drug, subjecting them to stricter regulations than standard over-the-counter supplements. As I said earlier, this was a veiled attempt by the FDA to protect the huge profits made by big pharma on statin drugs. Red yeast rice was threatening to cut down on that huge profit of the drug companies. So the FDA went after red yeast rice to try and have it made a prescription drug, which of course would have completely ruined it. It never really got through, though, because red yeast rice is a completely natural product. It is not a drug, and the monocolin K that it contains, even though it's the exact same stuff that's found in statin drugs, it's still a natural substance. A 2011 analysis showed that some of the red yeast rice products on the market contain very little monocolin K. That's a problem. A lot of the red yeast rice products don't even contain enough monocolin K to do a damn thing. They're just a complete waste of money. I'm going to give you a couple of brand names that have been tested and shown to have sufficient amounts of monocolin K shortly. Now, certain things you don't want to take with if you do use red yeast rice or statins. You want to avoid drinking alcohol if you're taking red yeast rice, because when you drink alcohol with red yeast rice, you increase the chance of liver damage. Speaking of liver damage, one possible side effect of red yeast rice is an increase in liver enzymes. The same thing occurs when you take oral anabolic steroid drugs, and that causes a liver inflammation induced by both red yeast rice and anabolic steroid drugs. Now, this always happens when anyone takes oral anabolic steroid drugs. It doesn't always happen to people who use red yeast rice. I unfortunately were one of the people that it did happen to. A couple of years ago, I had a lab test done. I had a slightly elevated LDL. I didn't want to use statin drugs, so I purchased some red yeast rice. I went and had a lab test done, and it showed extremely high liver enzymes. It almost looked like I was taking oral steroids, which I wasn't. As soon as I got off the red yeast rice, my liver enzymes went back to normal, completely back to normal, which makes me hypothesize that taking either statin drugs or red yeast rice and with oral anabolic steroids is a very bad combination for the liver, because it will accentuate the liver inflammation induced by oral steroids. It'll be ingesting red yeast rice or statin drugs will be additive to the oral anabolic steroids and cause even greater liver inflammation, which greatly increases the chance of permanent liver damage, including fibrosis, cirrhosis, and that type of thing. You also don't want to take high-dose niacin if you're taking red yeast rice, because that also increases the chances of muscle breakdown, medically known as a myopathy. There's an herb called St. John's wort. If you take that St. John's wort with red yeast rice, you're going to greatly reduce the effectiveness of red yeast rice. It's like wasting your money if you take it with St. John. So the usual use of St. John's wort, by the way, is to treat mental depression, and it's a natural antidepressant. It's also very solar sensitive. If you take St. John's wort, you go out in the sun, you can get a hell of a sunburn. And also years ago, when people took ephedrine to either burn fat or increase energy, they tended to get, it's a stimulant. You tend to get jittery. If you took St. John's wort, it tended to turn off the jitteriness. However, there's a better way to do that just by using the supplement L-theanine from green tea, which will do the same thing without the problems associated with St. John's wort. Since 1998, the FDA has taken action against several companies selling red yeast rice, noting that it's illegal to market these supplements in the U.S. Apparently, they don't really they don't really do anything about it because Red Yeast Rice supplements are still being sold online in stores everywhere. Despite the long list of benefits associated with red yeast rice, supplementing with it may come with some adverse effects. Gastrointestinal problems like bloating, gas, and stomach pain are some of the most commonly reported side effects of red yeast rice. In more extreme cases, it can also cause issues like muscle problems, liver toxicity, and allergic reactions, similar to the side effects caused by prescription statin drugs. Doses ranging from 200 to 4,800 milligrams have been studied in clinical trials. Typically, the supplements, red yeast rice supplements, typically contain 10 milligrams of total monocolin. Most major supplement brands on the market generally recommend between 1,200 to 2,400 milligrams daily of red yeast rice, divided into 2 to 3 doses. Another problem with red yeast rice supplements is some of them, especially the ones that contain lower amounts of monocolin K, they can often contain a contaminant called citrinin. Citrinin is very bad stuff. It can cause kidney failure and liver failure. Horrible stuff. I would strongly suggest that if you do decide to purchase red yeast rice, you maybe contact the company first and ask them if the product has been screened for citrinin content. You don't want to take a supplement that contains citrinin. It's a bad toxin. In an article in the Archives of Internal Medicine, scientists analyzed samples from a dozen red yeast rice products. While some capsules contained as little as 0.1 milligram of monocolin, others contained 11.15 milligrams. So in other words, the range of active ingredient red yeast rice supplements varies enormously. Some of them contain the right amount, which is about 10 milligrams of monocolins. Others contain not even 1 milligram of monocolins. Which one should you look for? Again, these particular videos are not commercial, but when I talk about these subjects, people always ask to recommend a brand. So I found a couple of brands that have been tested to contain the right amount of these monocolins. I'm not recommending that anyone buy these. These are just the ones that have been tested. I'm not endorsing them, in other words. Here's the brands. HPF Cholestyne. It's spelled Cholestene. That's probably the best one you could get, red yeast rice. Nature's Sunshine red yeast rice also contains the right amount. Solray red yeast rice. Solray red yeast rice does contain monocolin, not quite as much as the others. You'd have to take more of the Solray brand. Those are 3 brands that are known to contain monocolin, the active ingredient. The best time to ingest red yeast rice is at night before bed, because your body synthesizes most of the cholesterol in your liver while you sleep. So you want to take either a statin drug or a red yeast rice drug at night to circumvent the production of cholesterol if you want to lower it. But I should also point out that red yeast rice in some people is known to cause insomnia. So if you take the red yeast rice before bed and it gives you insomnia, you don't want to take it. And as I said earlier, you got to be careful of the liver enzymes, because red yeast rice, as it did in me, and some people it can. And by the way, I took the suggested amount. I didn't take. I'm not one of these people where it says on the bottle, take 2 capsules, and I say to myself, well, if 2 capsules work, 6 capsules would be better. I don't do that. I follow the directions on the label of the red yeast rice product, and it still gave me extremely elevated liver enzymes to the point where a physician wanted to do a liver biopsy. But I kind of figured out in my mind that it must be the red yeast rice, so I just cut it out, and 2 weeks later, my liver enzymes, sure enough, were back down to completely normal levels. So that's about it for red yeast rice. It's an alternative for those who don't want to take statin drugs. It probably has less negative effects on muscle function. If you get a good brand, it'll probably work just as well as statin drugs, save you a lot of money. Unless, of course, you have insurance that'll pay for statin drugs, but statin drugs also have more side effects. They can cause eye problems. You want to try and, if you can, avoid statin drugs. Statin drugs, to me, in my mind, are for people that just refuse to exercise and diet properly. And, the doctors hand them out rather than give diet advice and exercise advice. They just hand you a prescription for statin drugs, a drug that has a whole list of long side effects. I think your first option really should be to go through natural means. Try exercise such as aerobics, which raises HDL, protective HDL, lowers LDL. and favorably affects blood lipids. Also diet. You want to get rid of refined carbohydrates. If you lower carbohydrates, you will lower triglycerides, and you'll also change the structure of LDL to what they call the large, fluffy LDL, which is much less atherogenic, much less prone to oxidation. So that's about it for this red yeast rice video. If you want more information on supplements, very in-depth information. For example, in one of the upcoming issues of Applied Metabolics, I'm going to have a gigantic article where I look at every fat burner substance on the market. I'm going to tell you how it works, and I'm going to tell you possible side effects. An article like this has never appeared anywhere, and it's only going to appear in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. I also cover ergogenic aids, hormonal therapy, anti-aging research, fat loss techniques that really work, women's health, ergogenic aids, exercise science, and many, many other topics. It's 40 to 50 pages every month. It's like getting a monthly ebook. Has no advertisements. I'm not trying to sell you anything except solid evidence-based information based on current science and my own 57 years of consistent study and experience that can't be matched by anyone that I know of. So subscribe today to Applied Metabolics, www.appliedmetabolics.com. Subscribers will also be invited to join my private Applied Metabolics Facebook page, where every day I post articles on nutrition, exercise science, general health, and medicine. I also have an email portal on my Applied Metabolics site where I will answer questions from subscribers only. I don't answer unsolicited questions. You are welcome to leave comments. Hopefully they're friendly comments under this video. I can't guarantee I will answer them. It all depends on how important I think the question is, and also how much time I have. Generally, I usually don't have much time to respond to comments, but you're welcome to leave them if you want. Well, that's about it. If you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, there's Bruno's on the couch next to me taking a nap. Great, he's a great little guy. Go to your local shelter and adopt a dog. Dogs are fantastic. I love them. Take care.